My corporate policy is to leave no book unsigned. Please wait until the end of the line. Okay, so given all that, do you have any questions? Yes?
What town in South Dakota were you born in?
I was born in Watertown. My mother was from Summit, as Grandpa Anderson called it, and my father was from Marvin, 10 miles away. I'll be talking a little more about that during the presentation. I think it's going to be part of the presentation. But I've just spent the last 2 days at an Anderson family reunion here in the Black Hills with my mother's family. My father's family doesn't have family reunions for good reason. Never mind. Okay. Any other questions? You had one, didn't you?
Yes, I'm interested in the Joanna Brady books. Did you hike all that area in Arizona to get that to be able to describe that country?
Okay, here's what you need to know about my books. Believe me, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. We moved to South Dakota, from South Dakota to Bisbee, Arizona in 1949 when I was 4 years old. And not only did I hike a lot of that territory, I did it barefoot in the summer. My feet were really tough. We went across the road, as we called it. Our house was the last street. Yuma Trail was where our house was on the last street on the edge of town. And across the street was pasture. And we always called that up across the road. And we spent most of the time in the summer barefoot. And so, yes, that's how I know a lot about Arizona. And in all those years of being barefoot in Arizona, I was stung once by a scorpion that was in our yard. My mother was in the hospital having one of my younger brothers, I don't remember which one, and I was standing there screaming bloody murder because he stung me right on my big toe. And our next door neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker, heard the screaming and came running over with a bottle of Mrs. Stewart's bluing, which she put on my toe and immediately removed the sting. So I'm sure it would work the same way on bee stings and probably on mosquito stings too. Those of you who are coming in, do not hurry, do not worry, the program has not started. You are not late. This is an informal question and answer period because when I finish up my presentation, I'm usually done and I don't want to hang around and answer any more questions. Yes?
I'm a Badger Clark fan.
You're a which?
Badger Clark.
Okay.
And I know that he lived near Bisbee, Tombstone area in the early 1900s. Were you aware of him in Bisbee? He lived on the Kendall Ranch out there.
Boy, this is something that is news to me. And if you could send me some information, I'd be glad to know about him. By the way, how many people in this room are in my database and received a personal email from me telling you that I would be in Rapid City, South Dakota this weekend? What the hell is the matter with you people? You knew, thank you. She has the blog. Okay, here's the deal. I have a website. It is very simple, jajance.com. You go to my website and it says send me an email and you click on that and then you give me your first and last name, your city and state, and then magically you are in my database. And I let you know when I'm coming to town. I let you know when books are coming out. The other thing that you can read, as this lady does, is my blog. The blog is posted once a week on my website. What is it again?
Jance.com.
Yes, oh my God. And also on my Facebook page. And the blog is sort of a window on my life. A lot of people are operate under the mistaken impression that writers lead solitary lives, writing quietly away in the attic. You know, it's just not like that. And so my blog will tell you what's going on in my life. Periodically, I will do a rant. I have done rants, I think, recently about food in school cafeterias, as I recall. I think that was one.
Yeah.
But most of the time, the blogs are fun. I try to be, there's enough bad news in the world, so I try to be sort of uplifting and fun if it's at all possible. And when I arrived here, I was sitting over there looking at the wall of remembrance. And my Aunt Alice's pancake house, the little red hen, washed down Rapid Creek rapidly in 1972. So I do have some connections to Rapid, and I will be, see, I know you can leave off the word city, which sort of betrays my South Dakota roots a little bit. So I do have some connections, and I'll be talking about that again, too, in the talk. But Rapid City is a lot like reservation. When I'm writing my books, I would say the Hopi or the Navajo or the Tohono O'odham or the Apache, and the copy editors in New York always add on reservation, and I always take that word out because among my friends who still call themselves Indians as opposed to indigenous peoples, they don't put the reservation on it. They say the name. I think that was a rant. Okay. Anybody else have nerve enough to ask me a question? Boy, I really did scare you. Yes.
I'm late, so you may have already dealt with this. But I'm curious why so many mystery writers, including yourself, have so much about alcohol and recovery.
Would you please come, step forward and buy my poetry book, which will answer that question. You know, I think one of the reasons
I'm in the program myself, and I'm
Okay,
just so
well,
curious that so many
I spent,
perspectives are.
well, we've been there, done that, got that t-shirt too. I spent 18 years of my life with a man who died of chronic alcoholism at age 42. You have to work really hard to make that happen, and he was good at it. But what I think is really amazing, I didn't start writing until after I had divorced him and before he died. So he never saw he didn't live long enough to see my first book published. But I started writing the Beaumont books, and I wrote 4 of them. And I was down in Portland signing the 4th book, and a lady came up to the table, and she said, you know, Bo drinks every day. He has a drink of choice, and it's starting to interfere with his work. Does J.P. Beaumont have a problem? And I said, you know, these are books. Essentially, alcoholism is a disease of denial. No wonder the author was the last person to figure it out. That part got written into the books entirely invisibly to me. And then once I noticed, I sort of had to pay attention, and that's how he gets sober. He has his first blackout in book 7, goes into treatment in book number 8. But that was going into the book without my necessarily being aware of it. A number of years ago, I was in Austin, Texas for the Texas Book Festival, and there was a guy standing in line grinning at me. And when you're doing a book signing, you worry about the people who grin at you. And you also worry about the people who are last in line, because usually every book signing has at least one nutcase. I don't see anybody here that qualifies. The one that really took the cake was the guy who came up to the table and said, "Are you the lady who writes murder mysteries?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I've just been acquitted of murdering 7 people. Do you want to write my book?" So I was watching this grinning guy in Texas and worrying about him. And when he finally got to the front of the line, I saw that he was pushing a stroller with a little girl in it, a toddler. And he said, "My name is Rob. I first started reading your books in 6th grade at Rose Hill Junior High in Redmond, Washington." Now, it just happens that my daughter now lives directly across the street from Rose Hill Junior High. But he said, "As soon as I read my first Beaumont book, I wanted to be a cop." He said he graduated from high school, he went into the Army, and the whole time he was in the service, he was an MP. He said by the time he mustered out of the service, he was a raging alcoholic, but he still wanted to be a police officer. So he got hired on by a small jurisdiction somewhere in the middle of Texas, and they hired him and sent him to the police academy. He said on the day he graduated from the academy, he realized that if he was ever going to be the kind of cop J.P. Beaumont is, he had to get sober. So he went directly from the academy to treatment, and he is now the chief of police in that small jurisdiction. But then he introduced me to his daughter. He said, "This is my daughter. Her name is Morgan. My wife wouldn't let me name her JP." Does that answer your question? By the way, my husband says, with me there are no short stories. There are only long stories. So sometimes the answer may go astray, and if you ask the question, it's your job to bring me back to the task at hand. And you people in the back, you are not late. This is an informal Q&A because the main speaker has not yet been introduced, but she can't afford to have an opening act, so this is it. Okay, yes.
I've lived in the state of Washington, and it states that you,
I'm sorry,
oh,
louder.
I have lived in the state of Washington, in Olympia, and it says that you also live in Washington, the state of Washington, in Arizona. What part of Washington?
The part of Washington I live in does not have an R in it. It's Washington, not Washington. Bad person.
I've been teased about that all my life.
And Grandma Busk used to wrench her dishes too. I understand. I'm just teasing you. I live in Bellevue on the east side of Lake Washington. I used to live when I first moved to Seattle, I lived in the Denny Regrade, which my daughter called the dental regrade because our dentist was there. But, and then we also have a home in Tucson. So we're sort of misguided snowbirds, because since our kids and grandkids all live in Washington, we come back, we go down in the fall and then come back to Washington for the holidays. So we're sort of rubber band snowbirds. We're not really serious snowbirds. Okay, there was another hand raised someplace. Where did it go?
Over here.
Over there.
Yes. Where do you come up with your ideas? Is it out of newspapers and you read of a murder done this way and you incorporate it into one of your books?
I'm trying to figure out if I should answer his question now or if I should answer his question later in the talk. I try my best to stay away from real cases because real cases affect real people. The people who are family members, friends, and loved ones of a murder victim number their days from how their life was before that happened to how their life was after that happened. And I don't think I have the right to bring that kind of pain back up for someone just for the sake of writing a novel. I'll be talking about Hour of the Hunter in a little while here. In 1970, my first husband, the rat, and I crossed paths with a serial killer. This was in Tucson on the 22nd of May, and this was a guy who killed people at 20 minutes after 2 on the 22nd day of the month. And half an hour after he left his third victim, raped her, shot her in front of her 2 children, and left her to die. He picked up my husband, who was hitchhiking to get home. I had to stay late to decorate for the prom. And on the way to our house, which was out in the middle of the desert, 7 miles to the nearest neighbor and/or telephone, he asked my husband, well, do you leave your wife out here by herself much? And Jance said, well, she's got the dogs. He had given the guy a break. He had no idea he was speaking to a serial killer. This guy shot people off moving vehicles. He shot a 16-year-old girl off a bicycle, a 40-something-year-old man off a bulldozer, and a 28-year-old woman on her way to Mexico for the weekend. He shot her while she was driving her car down the road. Eventually, when we found out what had happened, my husband spoke to the authorities, and the information he provided was instrumental in tracking the guy down and eventually bringing him, he didn't go to trial, he did a guilty plea to 2 of the charges. They left the 3rd charge standing in case he ever got out of prison on the first 2. And that happened in 1970, and he is still in prison in Florence, Arizona. In April of 2001, we went to Pine Top, Arizona, to a library to do an event sort of like this. After the guy came up to the table and said, I've just been acquitted of murdering 7 people, my husband and I, with a nod to Carol Burnett, developed this signal. And this signal means whoever is in front of the table getting a book signed or not signed is a problem. Please come and rescue me. The problem was, in Pine Top, there were a whole bunch of people that I had taught with on the reservation in the late 60s and early 70s. And I had my new husband, he's my old husband now. We've been married almost 30 years now. But he, in 2001, he was new to all those people from the reservation. So while I was doing my talk, I watched people, you know, There are no teleprompters here. I have no notes on any of my hands. So I watch people in the audience, and when I mention something that is familiar to them, somebody else sort of jab the person they're with, or they'll nod and smile. But I watch the faces. And in Pine Top, at the very back of the room, there was a woman who didn't nod, who didn't smile. She stood there the whole time with her arms crossed. And I thought, oops, she's the one. So sure enough, the book signing started and everybody crowded around Bill. It took him out of summoning range. The person who is last in line, the person who hangs around to be last in line is usually the problem child. And sure enough, she was last in line. She stepped up to me at the table and she said, "Was your husband a witness in a series of homicides that took place in Tucson, Arizona in 1970? And I said, "Yes, he was." And she said, with no further introduction, as though we had been having this conversation for 30 years, she said, "My father was the man on the bulldozer. My mother was pregnant with me when that happened. She would never talk about it. What can you tell me?" I do not use real cases in my books. And when you read Hour of the Hunter, this is the first Walker book. If you have missed this book, I'm going to urge you to unmiss it. There are 4 books in this series right now. The 5th one, Dance of the Bones, will be out in September. But in Hour of the Hunter, I couldn't use the real killer in that book because he was in prison and I didn't want him to look at me. So what you'll discover in Hour of the Hunter is this. They bought the book. The first book I ever wrote. All 1,600 pages. Was the thinly fictionalized version of that series of homicides in 1970. The resulting book was 1,200 pages long. Nobody ever bought it because, 1,200 pages is approximately 3 times too long for your regular murder mystery. So I wrote it and sent it out, but nobody bought it. Then when it was time to write my first hardback, my editor said, "Oh, you remember that book you wrote a long time ago? The one nobody ever bought? How about if you redo that one and we'll turn that into your first hardback?" Well, okay. But that was 1990. And that guy was still in prison in Arizona, and I didn't want him paying attention to me. So I had a contract to write a book. I had a paycheck to write a book. But I had no idea who the bad guy was going to be in that book. It gave me my first really intense case of writer's block, which was so serious that year, when my University of Arizona Alumni magazine came, I read the whole thing from cover to cover. See, you understand the desperation, don't you? Well, right at the back was this little, just before the obituaries, was this little article that said the newly reconstituted creative writing program at the U of A was just going swimmingly. Now I turned to Bill, my husband, and I said, I graduated from there and I've got all these writers out. Yeah. No, they wouldn't let me into the creative writing program in 1964 because, as the professor told me, I was a girl. But, time has passed, maybe all is forgiven, and they'd like me to come down and be writer in residence for a semester in the sun. Bill said, call them up, ask them. Well, I spent 10 years of my life selling life insurance. I can make a cold call. So I got the number from information, I called them up and I told them who I was, when I graduated, and I had all these books, didn't they want me to come be writer in residence? And the director on the phone said to me, and this is a direct quote, it is chiseled on my heart. He said, "Oh, we don't do anything with genre fiction here. We only do literary fiction." It was a miracle. I was healed of writer's block on the spot. And the crazed killer in this book turns out to be a former professor of creative writing from the University of Arizona. So here's the lesson. The lesson for the day is, don't make mystery writers mad. I think there's somebody here to introduce the speaker.
I think we should give a round of applause to our fabulous warm welcome. All right, thank you all for coming. It's fabulous to see so many people. We really appreciate that. J.A. Jance is the top 10 New York Times bestselling author of the J.P. Beaumont series, the Joanna Brady series, the Ali Reynolds series, 4 interrelated thrillers featuring the Walker family, and a book of poetry. Her books have more than 23 million copies in print. Jance is an avid crusader for many causes, including the American Cancer Society, Gilda's Club, the Humane Society, the YWCA, and the Girl Scouts. A lover of animals, J.A. Jance and her husband Bill have a rescued dachshund named Bella. Born in South Dakota and raised in Bisbee, Arizona, Jance and her husband now split their time between Seattle, Washington and Tucson, Arizona. Please help me welcome J.A. Jance.
Well, now I'm petrified because I know what she said because I know how that introduction goes. But I didn't hear any of it. And so are people in the back, can you hear all right? If not, now is the time to speak. Thank you for adjusting my, whatever those things are. One year I couldn't remember. It was Christmas and a friend, my literary agent, who is also a friend, was going to the store and she said, "Do you need anything from the store?" And I wanted eggnog, but I couldn't remember the word eggnog, so I said holiday milk. And we were going to Switzerland, and I asked the guide, I said, "If we're going to Switzerland, we need to be able to have fondue," went away, and I said, cheese with sticks. So, I know the word for that, but never mind. It's amazing that somebody can write all those words and forget one. I'm really very happy to be here. I've been to the Black Hills many times, but this is the first time in a long time when I've been at an Anderson family reunion, and I see some of my in-laws and outlaws in the audience. And I'm here with my sister Jay. My sister Jay was my refuge when I left Seattle, left Phoenix after a really tough divorce and needed to put myself back together. And so we lived as roommates in the Denny Brigade for a number of years. And part of what got me writing books was taking the Dale Carnegie course. But once I sold a book and realized that at some point in time I'd need to be able to talk to people about my books, she was the one who encouraged me to spend a year in Toastmasters. And Toastmasters is how I learned to become a public speaker. So thank you, Jay, for all of that. My second husband, the nice one, is the guy over there in the corner. That's Bill. We met at a widowed retreat the week before my first book was published. We met on the 21st of June. We discovered our first spouses had died on the same day of the year, 2 years apart. They both died a few minutes before midnight on New Year's Eve. And so we struck up a conversation based on that coincidence on the 21st of June. And then we hauled off and got married on the 21st of December. We were in love. Our 5 adolescent children were not in love. And at the time, I was making hardly any money from writing books, but that guy knows how to back a winning horse. My first husband, who was allowed in the creative writing program that was closed to me, never published anything. He told me there was only going to be one writer in our family, and he was it. And when I left Arizona in my '78 Cutlass Supreme Brougham, that he said I never should have bought and would never be able to pay for, hauling our worldly goods in a U-Haul trailer behind me. I'm sure he is spinning in his grave over the idea that we flew here and will be flying back aboard a private jet. If I were a nicer woman, I would not be like this. But every time I sit, I click my seatbelt in one of those private jets, I'm thinking, neener, neener, neener. Oh, did you think this was going to be serious today? Well, it's not serious. I like to use these events to give you information about some of the books, but I also like to give you a little information about me, because I think it's important to have an understanding of the person behind the words. And so that's what I'm going to use a lot of this time for. I was born in Watertown. My mother was from Summit, as Grandpa Anderson called it, and my father was from Marvin, 10 miles away. In 1935, he went to Summit courting my mother's younger sister, Toots. And according to Grandpa Anderson, the way he told the story is, I told him, Norman, in this house we eat the old bread first. Which is how my father spent the next 68 years of his life, with my mother Evelyn, as opposed to my Aunt Toots. By the way, if you have read the Joanna Brady books, you've met my mother. She bears an astonishing resemblance to Joanna Brady's mother, Eleanor Lathrop Winfield. And one of my mother's older sisters, my Aunt Alice, asked me once, well, doesn't Abby mind the way you portray her in the books? And she didn't. She told me once, she said, I really like that Eleanor Lathrop. She's the first character in fiction I ever met who really knows how the world works. In 1948, my father spent a good deal of the year bedridden with rheumatoid arthritis. They had a farm near Twin Brooks. They had 17 cows to milk. They had 3 1/8 kids. And my father was in bed. So that was sort of inconvenient. He went to Millbank and talked to a doctor there, and the doctor told him, you need to move to a high, dry climate. My mother only had a 7th grade education. She was out of school for 2 years with rheumatic fever, and by the time she came back, there was no catching back up. But her favorite subject was geography. So when my dad came home from Millbank with that news, she opened her tattered geography book to a map of Arizona. She pointed to Bisbee in the far right-hand corner of the page and said, that's high and dry, we're moving there. You did not argue with my mother, by the way. So that's where we went. Now, while they were considering moving to South Dakota, they did have an opportunity to buy a dairy farm at the corner of, wait for it, Scottsdale Road in Camelback. They didn't buy it because it was too risky. Instead, we went to Bisbee, where my father went to work underground, while his legs were still so crippled that he had to pull himself up and down the ladders with his arms and shoulders. But he had a year of normal school after high school, which meant that he had more education than most of the other underground miners. So they called him the professor and put him in charge of dynamite, thus contributing to his severe hearing loss in later years. And that's Bisbee is where I grew up. I wanted to tell you a little, I mentioned in the Q&A that I would tell you a little about my connection to Rapid City. When my parents decided to move to Arizona, their parents and were sort of devastated because their parents and grandparents had left Sweden and Denmark and never went back. And I'm sure they thought that we would hie off to Arizona and they would never see us again. And so our folks promised that they would bring us back to visit every other year. And so every other year, we left the high desert, Bisbee is 5,000 feet, and came to South Dakota and suffered through 2 weeks of death by farmhouse upstairs bedrooms. I have never in my life been as hot in Arizona during the summer as in those upstairs farmhouse bedrooms in Summit and Marvin. Well, but we came back every year, and we had cousins, still have cousins. And one of my cousins was a TV star here in Rapid City. Her name was Polly Johnson, and she had a country western program on Saturday nights here on the local station called The Hoedown. And that was when she was 16 years old. And when I was 15, we came to South Dakota. My father had promised one of my younger brothers, by the way, in Bisbee, Arizona, there were 3 families that had 7 kids. There were the Angelaries at the top of Yuma Trail. They were Catholic. Everybody understood why there were so many Angelary kids. And then there were the Petersons. They had 7 kids. They were Mormon. Everybody understood about the Peterson kids. And then there were the Busks of Yuma Trail. We were Congregationalists. And if anybody ever had nerve enough to ask Evie Busk why there were so many kids, she was happy to tell them which failed birth control device each of us was. But my father promised one of my brothers that when he was, I think it was when Jim was going to be 10, that we would come to South Dakota for Christmas. And so we came to South Dakota, and we came by way of Rapid City. And I was old enough to go with Polly to the taping of The Hoedown. And we drove there in her little red and white Metropolitan, the little Nash Rambler, beep, 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 it's hard. And she, believe me, driving on snow and ice did not deter her. in even a little bit. I was amazed. Then I think she had some kind of a falling out with the people she was working with. So she moved to California, where she got saved and became a gospel singer. She sang with another country western gospel artist named Mary Jane. I can't remember Mary Jane's last name. But Polly had an album coming out in the fall of 1964, an album called I Found the Answer. She was supposed to go to Washington, D.C. and receive a congressional award of some kind for her work with youth in the Central California area. The week before she was supposed to leave, she sat down and wrote letters to a number of people, including to my sister Jay, saying, you know, I should be packing to get ready for this trip to DC, but somehow writing these letters seems like it's more important. On her way to the airport on the 7th of May of 1964, someone gave her a demo copy of the book, of the album that was coming out. And the title song goes like this. I found the answer, I learned to pray. With faith beside me, I found my way. The sun is shining for me each day. I found the answer, I learned to pray. So she took the album with her. She got on the plane. And it was one of the first instances of plane hijackings in this country. Someone with a gun broke into the cockpit, killed both pilots, and the plane crashed. Days later, a farmer out plowing a field came across that record. It had flown out of the cardboard album cover. It had flown out of the paper wrap, and it was lying there in the soft plowed dirt with only that round center label showing, saying, I found the answer. And I think she did. Whoa. So that's my Rapid City story. Oh, you didn't want to cry today? Too bad. That's why I don't wear mascara. Well, now I'm totally off track. I have no idea what I want to tell you next. I grew up in Bisbee, Arizona. By the time I graduated from Bisbee High in 1962. There were 128 kids in our class. I was number 7. By the way, when you send me an email, I do not have trolls living out under a bridge who sort through my emails and give me the important ones. If you send me an email, I am the person who answers the email. I don't have any kind of sorting mechanism because messages from my readers are my business. And I don't want somebody standing between me and my readers. Most of the time, people write me nice emails. If you send me a cranky email, those sort of go to the bottom of the list. I answer it eventually when I feel like it. But here's a bit of advice. When somebody wrote to me and said, I really didn't like such and such a book. And I wrote back and I said, I'm sorry, you're disappointed. Because when my readers are disappointed, I am sorry. She immediately wrote back to enumerate all the reasons she didn't like the book. Well, I'm sorry. If you want to say something mean to me, say it all in one email. because I will answer the first email, I will not answer the second email. So a person wrote to me and said, I do not know why you put all that scholarship stuff in the Allie Reynolds books. It has nothing to do with the plot, and you should just leave it out. Well, number one, I write the books. I get to put in what I want. But now you know why, as number 7 in my class, I want to focus those scholarships on the second-tier kids. Not the kids that are going to get scholarships for sure anyway, but the kids who might not get scholarships. So, in the class of 1962, from Bisbee High School, there were 2 girls who were pregnant. One was Linda Sales Beach. She was actually pregnant with her second child. She and our other classmate, Claude, had gotten in trouble our sophomore year. They married between our junior and senior year, and by the time we were about to graduate, Linda was expecting their second baby. There was another girl in our class who was also pregnant. She was unmarried. She happened to have a very burly boyfriend with a very burly Letterman sweater, and his Letterman sweater concealed a multitude of sins. And so we will henceforth refer to her as Letterman Sweater Girl. At the beginning of May, with graduation scheduled for the end of May, Linda Sales Beach received a letter from the acting superintendent of schools saying that due to her delicate condition, she would not be allowed to participate in class night, baccalaureate, or graduation. Okay. Maybe it wouldn't have bothered me so much if Claude had gotten a letter too, but you know, the father of the delicate conditions didn't get a letter. And all during our junior, senior year, he was varsity football, baseball, basketball, and track, all of which are far more dangerous than walking through graduation. Letterman Sweater Girl didn't get a letter either. So my best friend, Pat McAdams Hall, and I were co-editors of the newspaper, the Copper Chronicle, and we were also troublemakers. So we began passing a petition asking for Linda to be allowed to graduate with our class. The first thing that happened is Mrs. Riggins, the newspaper advisor, called Pat and me in and told us we needed to stop passing that petition. We said, no, this isn't fair. Next, the senior class sponsor, Mrs. Medikovich, called us in and gave us the same message. We said, no, this isn't fair. About a week and a half later, on a Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang at our house when I came home from school. Now, okay, I know, this is 2015, and I just told you I graduated in 1962, and I saw a couple of you roll your eyes and say, how could she possibly expect us to believe that whatever happened next happened on a Tuesday afternoon? Well, I can tell you with dead certainty. I came home from school, the phone rang, and I answered it because my mother was ironing, and every busk washed on Monday and ironed on Tuesday. So the gentleman on the phone asked to speak to my father. I said he wasn't home. Then he asked to speak to my mother, and I put her on. And he told her, so she said, okay, when Norman comes home, I'll tell him. My dad came home and she said, you need to call the acting superintendent of schools. So he did. And when he got off the phone, he turned to me and he said, Judith, I've just been informed that you have been selected to receive the Bisbee High School Alumni Scholarship to the University of Arizona. You will receive the scholarship on class night as long as you stop passing that petition. I was one of 7 kids. There was very little money in our family. That scholarship was the only way I could go on to school, and I wouldn't be here had I not gone on to school. But I always felt as though my success came as a result of grinding Linda Sales Beach into the dust because she did not receive her diploma at graduation. She died of cancer when we were all still in our 20s. But I always felt guilty about that. Then a couple of years ago, at a book signing in Tucson, a gentleman I didn't recognize came up to the table and he said, "Hi, Judy. I'm Amos Sales." And I knew at once that he was Linda's older brother. And he said, "Our whole family knew what you tried to do back then. Thank you." So yes, the scholarship stuff will stay in the Ellie Reynolds books, whether they're part of the plot or not. Okay, what else do I want to tell you? See, I told part of my usual talk in the before part, and so now I'm really sort of totally adrift. When I sat down to write my first Beaumont book, I didn't know I was going to write a Beaumont book. I spent 6 months trying to write that first book, Until Proven Guilty, through the wrong point of view, and that book just wouldn't go anywhere. So finally, in the spring of 1983, I sent my kids to Camp Orcala for spring break, and I put myself on a train to go down to Portland and visit with a friend of mine from my time in the life insurance business. I got on the train with a stack of blue line notebooks and a fistful of pens. And as the train pulled out of the King Street station in Seattle, I thought, what would happen? What would happen if I wrote this book through the detective's point of view? And I wrote the words, "She might have been a cute kid once. That was hard to tell now. She was dead." And as soon as I wrote those words, I was inside J.P. Beaumont's head. I was walking around the crime scene in his shoes, and Beau and I have been together as author and character for more than 30 years. Longer than I've been with my husband. We have a nice little menage a trois. I write the books, Beau does what I tell him, and Bill writes the checks. In case you're wondering why I have to write 2 books a year, he can write checks really fast. And that's the only way to stay ahead of the shoe shine. I wrote 9 Beaumont books, and I was really sick and tired of Beau. I am no Sue Grafton. If it were up to me, Kinsey Milhone would have been dead a lot sooner than the end of the alphabet. So when I told my editor I was thinking of knocking Beau off, he said, "Oh no, please don't do that. Do you remember that first book you wrote, the one nobody ever bought? How about if you rework that book?" And that's where Hour of the Hunter came from. I spent 5 years as a K-12 librarian on the Tohono O'odham. I told 26 stories a day in K-5, 26 stories a week in K-5 classrooms. Some of the stories that I told were the ones we all grew up with. Little Red Riding Hood, Molly Whuppie, Rapunzel, Cinderella, but I also told the stories and legends of the Tohono O'odham people. And so, when I started writing the first of the Walker books, Hour of the Hunter, what my goal in writing that book was to make people who would never come to Tucson, Arizona, have some understanding of that group of people who have lived in the valley where Tucson is since Noah was going around in the big flood. By the way, the Tohono O'odham also had their flood legend. And so I wove the pieces of Tohono O'odham lore and legend into the background of Hour of the Hunter and all of the other Walker books as well, including the one that's coming this September, Dance of the Bones. My husband was a pill. After our daughter was born, when that summer came around, and it was time for the wine festival on the reservation, he went. Now, there actually on the Tucson.com news site today, there was a picture of an Indian woman out picking the saguaro fruit. If you drive through stands of saguaro, you will see that next to one of those, there will be a spine of a dead saguaro. And that's what they use to knock the fruit off the top of the cactus. They harvest the fruit, and then they boil it, they ferment it, and they turn it into, they call it wine, but it's really a drink that is sort of the consistency of tomato juice, but packs the same wallop as tequila. And so for the wine festival, everyone sits in the circle, and they pour the wine into a tin can, and it's passed around, and everyone drinks the wine until they're so drunk that they pass out and bark. Now, the thing is, this is part of the sacred circle of life, because they're returning the fruit back to the earth where it came from. And you know, it may sound peculiar to us, but that's the belief, and that's the way it is. Well, that year after our daughter was born, guess what? Jerry Jance went to the wine festival, sat in the circle, and until he died, he couldn't help but rub it in, say, you know, I got to sit in the circle. Well, somebody had to stay home with the baby, and I was it. So that always bothered me a little. So I had written 4 of those Walker books. It had been 40 years since I had been invited back to the reservation. And then they asked me to come to Cells to do, to Tupauwa, beyond Cells, to do a book signing. Well, I was a little nervous because I had written those books with a great deal of respect, but I didn't know how they had been received on the reservation, and I was concerned about that. So the day we were supposed to go to Tupauwa was February. It was cold, it was windy, it was blustery. We got there and pulled into the parking lot. And it's full of cars with licenses from Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, South Dakota, because all of my snowbird fans had seen on the website that I was going to be at Tupauwa, and they had hauled off and driven out there, 70 miles one way. So the program started, and the medicine man stood up and did the invocation. It was very long. It was in Tohono O'odham. I know part of the time he was talking about me because evidently there is no word for librarian in Tohono O'odham. And And when the invocation was over, he said, okay, the young people are going to come out now, and they're going to do a sacred dance. Please do not take photos of them during the sacred dance. But when that is over and the social dance starts, you're welcome to join the circle. So when it was time for the social dance, I thought, well, I've griped about this for all these years. Now's my chance. When I stood up to go down and join the circle, they gave me a standing ovation. And then a miracle happened. Because all those Milgon, those Anglo ladies from Wisconsin and Michigan and Iowa, they came down and danced in the circle too. And it was and remains one of the very high points of my life as a writer. Okay, so if you have avoided the Walker books, as I know some of you have, some of you keep thinking, oh, she'll just get over it. I don't have to read those books. I remember I sold life insurance for 10 years. You've only told me no 5 times, so the Walker books, I understand, are darker than my mysteries. They're a little more R-rated than they are PG. But I think they will give you some insight into the peoples of the Southwest. In Dance of the Bones, there is a very uffish FBI agent who is trying to boss one of the Tohono O'odham characters around. And she says, yes, I'm sure she thinks I'm an indigenous person of the Southwest. So, yes, they are darker. But you have to remember that they're J.A. Jance books. And that's what art is. What makes art is the contrast between light and dark. And if there's no contrast, then it's all gray, and it isn't art. So just believe me, yes, it's dark, and yes, Andrew Philip Carlyle, the ex-professor, is an abominable character, and deservedly so. So just enjoy it. I was with my first husband for 18 years. They were tough years. He told me he was a drinker when I met him, but he always told me that when we had kids, he would stop, and I believed him because his father had been a drunk Herman was drunk when he went away to World War II. He came back sober, never went to a meeting, never had another drink. And so when he said, well, Jerry will shape up when he's ready, I believed him. And so my daughter was born. He dropped us off at the hospital. Then he stayed away for 3 days, drinking. Came back to pick us up drunk. And I had a terrible choice to make as a mother of a newborn. Did I let the drunk drive the car, or did I let the drunk hold the baby? I chose having the drunk hold the baby. This was 1972. There weren't car seats. There weren't newborn car seats. And then we went home to the hill, 7 miles to the nearest neighbor and/or telephone, and went through 5 days of DTs. 5 days of bugs crawling on him, of not being able to turn off the lights. And I thought, okay, I can be strong, we're doing this, because when I came home, I was mad. And he poured out all the booze and he said, okay, I'll keep my promise. But I had no idea what we were in for. And then 3 weeks later, some friends showed up. I could still hear the echo when he popped that lid off that beer can. He said, if you just had a boy. My son is 14 months younger than my daughter. That didn't fix it either. Between 1972, when my daughter was born, and 1980, when I filed for a divorce, he was hospitalized 9 times for chronic alcoholism. Finally, in 1980, he turned up at my 6-year-old son's t-ball game, so drunk at 5 o'clock in the afternoon that when the game was over, he crawled on his hands and knees from the bleachers back to the car. And it was during that walk with my children, their friends' parents, when I realized that if 18 years of loving him hadn't fixed him, I had to do something to save my children and save myself. That's when I filed for a divorce. But as soon as I filed for a divorce, he started showing up on my doorstep every Saturday morning saying, well, you know, you said in sickness and in health, this is sickness, you need to take me back. Well, I had a piece of paper that said we were divorced, but that did not untangle my heart. And I knew that I was still susceptible and was in danger of taking him back. So that's when I loaded my kids and their stuff into the U-Haul and the car, and we went north to Seattle. So yes, Seattle, Arizona is my home. That's where I remember growing up. But Seattle is my creative home because Seattle is where I started writing. During those tough years in Phoenix, those last 5 years were so tough. And I drove from appointment to appointment wondering, well, if I got a divorce, would I be able to, what would happen to us? Would I be able to support my family? Would I be able to, what would I do? So I drove to those appointments listening to the music of Gordon Lightfoot. Cobwebs and dust, cobwebs and dust, I hate to leave you, but leave you I must. And Helen Reddy, I am woman, hear me roar in numbers too big to ignore. And then there was the music of Janice Ian. Janice Ian's music. The words, the lyrics broke my heart. There was one song of hers that really, really spoke to me. I was 6 feet tall by the time I was in 7th grade, which means that junior high and high school were hell. I was 6 feet tall, I wore thick glasses, and I was smart. That's several thumbs down. And when I heard Janice's song at 17, I thought, boy, she and I have walked in the same moccasins. But then I found out Janice Ian is only 4'10". When we're next to each other, she barely comes up to my elbow. But I love that song. And for years, I ended my presentations by singing her song at 17. Wait a minute, I've forgotten something. I skipped something. I still want to sing at 17, but I need to tell you about After the Fire. During those tough years, first on the Hill and later in town, when I wasn't supposed to be being a writer, there wasn't a telephone at our house. My husband would be passed out cold by 6:30 or 7 o'clock at night. And I spent those long evenings by myself, writing poetry. And then, as soon as I wrote it, I hid it away because I wasn't supposed to be writing. There was only one writer in our family. So every morning, well, every night before I went to bed, I put the poetry in the strong box, hid it away so it would never be seen. I moved to Seattle. I was still writing poetry. Thanksgiving came, 1982. My former husband had been living in Phoenix in a house that belonged to his mother. It had once been his grandmother, so he didn't have to pay rent. He had broken a wrist his wrist on a work-related construction accident, so he had workman's comp. So he had money coming in, didn't have to pay rent, so he drank steadily from May to November. And then his mother, my first mother-in-law, Mary Grandma, called him up and said, well, I think I'll come down and see you for Thanksgiving. That was a big surprise. So he decided to sober up for her visit. And after months of drinking steadily, he went off cold turkey. Thanksgiving night, the cops found him lying in a street in Tempe, Arizona. They thought he had been hit by a car. In fact, he had gone into DTs. He was hospitalized Thanksgiving night with no kidney or liver function, and he died New Year's Eve. Mary Grandma was with him. She asked me to come down and help. I was the one who had the Christmas card list. I was the one who knew who should be pallbearers or who should be called or notified. And so I did come down to help. And then when I went back home, I had to get out all of those pieces of paper that you have to present when someone dies. Birth certificates, marriage certificates, divorce decree. And there, among those official papers, were those bits and pieces of poetry. I thought I had been being true to my art. But in actual fact, I had been being a writer and using words to deal with the essential issues of my life. After the Fire is a collection of that poetry, and it tells a very clear story. Now, sometimes when I offer the book of poetry to people, they'll sort of leap back like it's a striking rattlesnake. Now, I understand these people were traumatized by having to stand up and recite the Ode to a Grecian Urn in high school. This poetry is not an ode to a Grecian urn. And the poems are accompanied by little essays that will tell you what was going on in my life at the time I wrote them. The title poem of After the Fire goes like this. I have touched the fire. It burned me, but I knew I lived. It seared me, but it made me whole. He called me. I went gladly, though I saw the rocks fell laughing through the singeing air. I have known the fire. I'll live with nothing rather than with less. The flame is out. There's nothing left but ash. Does that answer your question? Okay, so I wanted you to know that people are reluctant to buy poetry, but believe me, it will not kill you. And in case you've wondered why Joanna Brady is so short, I've always wondered what it would be like to be short. So I made Joanna short, so I have to see the world through her point of view when I'm writing her stories. But back to Janice Ian. That song, her song at 17, touched me so much that when I started doing presentations like this, I often closed by singing her song. In 2006, I agreed a year in advance that I would go to Boise, Idaho to be the keynote speaker for a writers' conference. Then, my husband went to the hospital for dual knee replacement surgery. See, if you've read Second Watch, you want to know where I got the inside info on dual knee replacement surgery? Well, that's where. And he was supposed to be transferred from the hospital to rehab the day I was supposed to be in Boise. And I told the kids, I'm just going to call the writers' conference. I'm going to tell them, my husband is in the hospital, I can't come. And my daughter said, no, Mom, no. You said you would go, you need to keep your promise, we'll take care of Dad. So with much, isn't it annoying when your kids start spouting back to you the same thing you told them? Just pisses me off. And so, with a good deal of grumbling, I went to Boise, Idaho. And on Saturday morning, at noon, I gave a keynote address, and I finished by singing at 17. Sunday night, I opened my email, and there's an email from Janice Ian. Because in that audience in Boise, where I didn't want to go, there was a woman who was a fan of mine and a fan of Janice Ian's. And she went straight back to Nashville and told Janice Ian about my singing that song. And that's what she said. Hey, I heard you sang my song and that you did a good job of it. And since then, Janice Ian and I have become friends. I actually got to sing that song at 17 with her as a duet a couple of years ago. That wasn't easy because she still has that amazing range. And she said, Judy, you sing in the key of R. And so, here, in the key of R, in honor of my friend Janice Ian, is her song. I learned the truth at 17, that love was meant for beauty queens and high school girls with clear skin smiles who married young and then retired. The Valentines I never knew, the Friday night charades of youth were spent on ones more beautiful. At 17, I learned the truth. And those of us with ravaged faces, lacking in the social graces, desperately remained at home, inventing lovers on the phone who called to say, come dance with me, and murmur vague obscenities at ugly girls like me. At 17, a brown-eyed girl in hand-me-downs, whose name I never could pronounce, said, pity please the ones who serve, they only get what they deserve. A rich relation, hometown queen, marries into what she needs with a guarantee of company, haven for the elderly. Remember those who win the game, lose the love they sought to gain, in debentures of quality and dubious integrity. The small town eyes will gape at you in dull surprise when payment due exceeds accounts received. At 17, for those of us who learned the pain of Valentines that never came, for those whose names were never called when choosing sides for basketball. We all played the game, and when we dare, we cheat ourselves at solitaire, inventing lovers on the phone, repenting other lives unknown, who called to say, come dance with me, and murmur vague obscenities at ugly girls like me. At 17, it was long ago and far away. The world was younger than today, and dreams were all they gave for free to ugly duckling girls like me. Thank you for making my dreams come true.